Imagine waking up in the quiet hours of a gray morning, the weight of yesterday's betrayals pressing down on your chest like an unrelenting fog. Heitor, at 72, knows this feeling all too well. A widower, retired, and once full of quiet hopes for his golden years, now finds himself trapped, not by chains, but by the relentless prison of his own mind. The friend he trusted, the one who shared laughter and late-night talks, turned out to be a master of manipulation, seizing control of what should have been Heitor's legacy. With each dawn, Heitor's thoughts spiraled deeper into a labyrinth of what-ifs and should-haves. Could I have seen the signs? Was I too naive? These questions haunt him, echoing in the silence of his solitary home. This isn't just about lost money or broken friendship. It's about the invasion of an inner sanctum, where trust once lived and now doubt reigns. The betrayal cuts deeper than the surface wound. It fractures identity, casting shadows over memories and twisting the narrative of a life well lived into a story of failure and regret. Alone, Heitor wrestles with an invisible tormentor, overthinking. This mental tempest steals his sleep, erodes his peace, and amplifies loneliness, turning his mind into a relentless prosecutor, replaying every choice, every missed warning, every moment he wishes he could rewrite. Overthinking is a paradoxical trap. It masquerades as vigilance, promising clarity through scrutiny, but delivering paralysis instead. The mind, once a sanctuary of wisdom, becomes a battlefield where past mistakes are dissected endlessly. For Heitor, every night becomes a trial, and he is both judge and defendant, sentenced to relive pain without resolution. The solitude of his later years, which should be a time of reflection and calm, instead magnifies his isolation, making the prison walls of his thoughts thicker and more confining. In this state, guilt becomes a shadow companion. But whose voice is this guilt? Is it truly his? Or is it the echo of societal expectations, the harsh judgments of a world that values success and control above all else? Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote of the struggle to become who you are, a profound call to shed the masks imposed by others and the burden of external values. Yet, for Heitor, the path to this authenticity seems blocked by the heavy chains of blame and self-recrimination. How can one embrace freedom when shackled by the past? The complexity of Heitor's despair is not unique to him. It is a mirror held up to many in their later years. The ache of betrayal, the silent scream of loneliness, and the ceaseless whirl of overthinking are companions to countless seniors who, like Heitor, seek meaning and peace amid the ruins of trust. The paradox is cruel. The wisdom accumulated over decades is often overshadowed by the mind's relentless critique, and the desire for connection is met with the cold reality of solitude. Yet within this struggle lies a question that resonates beyond Heitor's personal pain. Can authenticity be reclaimed when the weight of guilt and doubt seems insurmountable? Is it possible to step out of the prison of overthinking and into a life defined by one's own values, not those imposed by others or past mistakes? These are not mere philosophical musings. They are urgent, pressing questions that touch the core of what it means to age with dignity and self-respect. Heitor's journey, beginning in this crucible of betrayal and mental turmoil, sets the stage for a profound transformation. It is here, amid the ruins of trust and the shadows of his own mind, that he will encounter a challenge unlike any other. A challenge to discard the inherited rulers of guilt and judgment and to craft a new, authentic self. But before that awakening can dawn, he must confront the roots of his suffering, understand the invisible forces that bind him, and find the courage to face the emptiness that has become his companion. As the morning light filters through the dusty windows of his quiet home, Heitor's story is just unfolding, a story that will soon intersect with an unexpected guide, a fellow traveler in the quest for self-discovery. Together, they will uncover the simple yet revolutionary step that promises freedom from the tyranny of overthinking and the chains of guilt. If you find yourself in Heitor's shoes, wrestling with the ghosts of betrayal and the endless loop of doubt, stay with us. We are about to explore not just the problem, but its hidden roots, the psychological and philosophical forces that hold us captive, and how, through understanding, a door to liberation begins to open. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if this story touches something deep within you. Your journey toward freedom and authenticity is just beginning. In the dusty quiet of his worn library, Heitor's fingers brushed against a weathered book bound in cracked leather. Nietzsche's voice whispering across the decades. "Become who you are," the words beckoned, a siren call both exhilarating and terrifying. How, Heitor wondered, could one embrace such an invitation when burdened by the weight of betrayal and the crushing guilt that shadowed every thought? The paradox was stark. To claim freedom, he first had to confront the very chains that bound him, chains forged by self-reproach and the relentless echo of what-ifs. Nietzsche's challenge was not merely philosophical, it was deeply personal, resonating within Heitor's aching soul. To become who you are demanded shedding the borrowed identities imposed by others, the judgments of society, the expectations of family, and most insidiously, the internalized voices that whispered blame and shame. These voices, often mistaken for one's own, were the remnants of external rulers, dictating worth through a harsh and unforgiving lens. For Heitor, his guilt was not purely self-generated. It was a borrowed burden crafted by the manipulations of a friend and amplified by years of cultural conditioning that equated failure with self-worth. The psychological entanglement here echoes Carl Jung's insight into the shadow self, the parts we deny or repress, yet which hold immense power over our emotions and actions. Heitor's overthinking was a dance with his shadow, replaying scenes of betrayal until the mind became a labyrinth without exit. Nietzsche, too, grappled with the heavy hand of guilt and the moral codes that society wields like chains. He argued that true authenticity arises when one refuses these externally imposed shoulds and instead forges an identity from within, a self not shackled by past mistakes or others' expectations. Philosophically, this is no small feat, especially in later life. The years have piled up like sediment, layering habits, regrets, and fears. The social narratives prescribed for elders often confine them to roles of quiet resignation or mournful nostalgia, further silencing the authentic self's call. Heitor's struggle vividly illustrates this existential tension, the desire to reclaim agency and the paralyzing weight of inherited guilt. The man who once trusted deeply now wonders if trust itself is a luxury he can no longer afford. Yet Nietzsche's words offer a flicker of radical possibility. To become who you are is not about perfection or erasing pain. It is about embracing the totality of one's experience, including the wounds. It demands a courageous confrontation with the self, an act of defiance against the internalized judges that seek to maintain control through shame. This process, however, requires more than willpower. It calls for a dismantling of the mental rulers, the standards and measures that have dictated Heitor's sense of value. Here lies the challenge. Guilt is often mistaken for moral compass. But what if it is a distorted echo of external expectations? What if the very guilt that torments Heitor is a borrowed ruler, a tool wielded by his betrayer and society alike to keep him confined? This realization is the first crack in the prison walls, a subtle shift that opens the door toward liberation. It suggests that the path to authenticity begins with questioning the origin of guilt itself. Whose voice is this? Is it truly his, or a reflection of others' judgments internalized over time? The tension grows as Heitor contemplates this. The past, with its betrayals and mistakes, looms large, yet Nietzsche's call is forward-looking. It is an invitation to step beyond the shadows of guilt into a space where values are self-chosen, not inherited or imposed. But how does one take that step when the mind is a battleground and old habits of self-recrimination feel like second nature? It is here, in this crucible of doubt and yearning, that Heitor's path intersects with Lara, a kindred spirit and former philosophy teacher who sees through the fog of guilt. Her words cut through the noise. The only step is to discard the ruler of others. Even your own guilt is a borrowed measure. This insight reframes the struggle, illuminating a way forward that is both simple and profound. It invites Heitor to reclaim authorship over his values, to write a new narrative not dictated by past wounds or external rulers, but by what he genuinely holds dear each day. Heitor begins to grasp that authenticity is not a distant ideal, but a daily act of courage. Small choices that defy the internal shoulds and affirm his own worth. This awakening is the seed of transformation, a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of overthinking and self-doubt. It is the first step toward a life where freedom is not an abstract concept, but a lived reality. As dawn breaks over the horizon, Heitor feels a faint stirring of hope, a fragile yet potent promise that liberation from guilt is within reach. The journey ahead will demand resilience and patience, but for the first time in many moons, the shackles of blame feel less absolute. The path to becoming who you are is daunting, but the alternative, living as a prisoner to the past, is no longer acceptable. In the coming days, Heitor and Lara will embark on a ritual that anchors this new philosophy into daily life, challenging the pervasive voices of doubt with affirmations grounded in self-chosen values. But before that, Heitor must confront deeper layers of his struggle, facing the invisible chains with clarity and resolve. Only then will the door to genuine freedom swing open. Stay with us as we delve into the next chapter of Heitor's journey, a story of rebellion against internal rulers and the birth of a new, authentic self. If this resonates with your own experience of guilt, doubt, or longing for freedom, remember to subscribe and leave a like. Your path to authenticity is unfolding step by step. Lara's eyes held a spark that Heitor hadn't seen in years, a light kindled not by naive hope, but by a fierce clarity born from decades of wrestling with life's complexities. She leaned forward, voice calm but cutting through the fog of his spiraling thoughts. Heitor, the only step toward freedom is to discard the ruler of others. Even your own guilt is a borrowed measure. The words landed like a sudden gust, shaking the fragile scaffolding of self-recrimination he had spent years constructing. In that moment, Heitor felt the weight of centuries of societal expectations, cultural judgments, and internalized blame pressing down on him, not as his own truth but as a foreign yoke. Lara's insight revealed the profound paradox of guilt. It often masquerades as an authentic self-judgment, yet it is more frequently an echo of external voices, parents, friends, society, whose standards we absorb and mistake for our own. For Heitor, this meant his torment over the betrayal was not solely a reflection of his own failings, but also a painful inheritance of others' imposed values and harsh verdicts. Together, they began a quiet rebellion against these invisible rulers. Each morning at 6, in the soft light filtering through his dusty study, they sat side by side with pens and blank pages. "What do I value today?" was the question they posed, without the coercive shoulds or musts that had so long dominated Heitor's inner dialogue. This daily ritual was more than writing. It was an act of reclaiming agency, a defiant assertion that his values could be chosen anew, not dictated by a past betrayal or the unforgiving gaze of society. It was not an easy path. Heitor confronted the remnants of his old coping mechanisms, the bottle that once dulled his anger, the obsessive loops of what if that gnawed at his nights. But Lara's steady presence and the discipline of their shared practice offered a new rhythm. one where small acts of self-care replaced self-punishment, where curiosity about his own desires began to bloom amidst the ruins of doubt. Each day, the fog lifted a little more, revealing a landscape where Heitor's authentic self could breathe. What struck Heitor most profoundly was Lara's radical framing. Authenticity was not about being free from pain or error. It was about refusing to betray oneself because of pain. This shift transformed his understanding of strength. No longer did he need to be a stoic fortress, impermeable to hurt. Instead, true freedom lay in embracing his wounds as part of the whole, refusing to let them dictate his worth or silence his voice. The borrowed rulers, those external standards and internalized guilts, were losing their grip. This awakening rippled through Heitor's days. He noticed how the urge to overthink began to loosen its hold, replaced by mindful choices. A walk instead of a spiral of doubt, a deep breath instead of a clench of regret. The ritual was not a cure, but a compass, pointing him toward a life defined by his own terms. And in this, a new form of freedom emerged, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of self-trust. Yet beneath this quiet revolution stirred another challenge. The past would not remain silent forever. The man who had betrayed Heitor, emboldened by time, would reappear, seeking forgiveness and perhaps more. But Heitor, armed with a new understanding of self-worth and the courage to discard external rulers, was no longer the man who could be easily swayed or manipulated. His values had been reclaimed, his boundaries redrawn. This moment, poised between the temptation to relapse into old patterns and the hard-won resolve to stand firm, would test the depth of Heitor's transformation. It was the crucible where authenticity must prove itself, not in theory, but in the raw encounter with the past's haunting echo. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows through the ancient trees outside, Heitor and Lara prepared to face this next chapter. The ritual had sown the seeds of change, but the harvest was yet to come. Would Heitor's newfound self-worth withstand the storm? Would he truly become the man Nietzsche envisioned, the one who, despite wounds and betrayals, refuses to wear another's chains? Stay with us as we step into this pivotal moment, where courage, authenticity, and the power to say, "Enough," converge. If you felt the crushing weight of guilt or the sting of betrayal, remember to subscribe and leave a like. Your own journey toward freedom, like Heitor's, unfolds one brave step at a time. At dawn, as the world still held its breath between night and day, Heitor and Lara sat side by side in the quiet sanctuary of his study. The ritual was simple but profound. A shared moment of honesty, a blank page, and a question that cut through decades of noise. What do I value today? No shoulds, no musts, no borrowed rulers from the past or from others' expectations. Just Heitor, stripped of the armor of guilt and obligation, reaching inward to discover what truly stirred his soul in that fragile moment. This daily act became a lifeline, a rebellion against the cacophony of overthinking that had once held him captive. Each morning, with pen in hand, Heitor wrestled with his shadows, the gnawing doubts, the ache of betrayal, the familiar whispers of, "if only." Yet, instead of surrendering to these ghosts, he began to name what mattered on his own terms: connection, honesty, peace, small acts of kindness toward himself. It was a slow unraveling of the tangled web of self-reproach, a careful weaving of new threads spun from authenticity, not obligation. Lara's presence was more than companionship. It was a mirror reflecting what Heitor could become. A man not defined by the wounds inflicted by others, but by the values he chose to nurture each day. She reminded him that authenticity was not a destination free from pain, but a courageous stance to not betray oneself because of it. This insight shifted Heitor's perspective. The bottle that once dulled his anger became a symbol of what he was leaving behind, replaced by simple rituals. A walk in the morning light, a moment of deep breath, a quiet note of gratitude. The ritual was not magic, nor a quick fix. Some mornings, the old voices surged with fierce intensity, tempting Heitor back into the labyrinth of what-ifs and should-haves. But the act of writing, of naming his values and intentions, planted a seed of self-trust that grew stronger with each dawn. This was discipline, not of rigid control, but of gentle persistence, a daily recommitment to his path. The storm of overthinking began to ebb, replaced by a calm vigilance where thoughts no longer ruled but were observed and released. In the wider world, this practice echoed a truth Nietzsche had long espoused. To become who you are requires shedding the borrowed rulers, the internalized guilt, the societal judgments, the expectations of others, and crafting a self forged in the fire of personal values. For Heitor, this meant reclaiming his narrative from the clutches of betrayal and doubt, transforming his story into one where he was not the victim but the author. This transformation also redefined his relationship with solitude and pain. Instead of seeing loneliness as a void to be filled or pain as a weakness to be masked, Heitor began to embrace them as part of his authentic experience. His vulnerability was no longer a liability but a form of strength, an honest acknowledgement of life's complexities without the need for pretense. This acceptance was liberating, allowing him to engage with others, like Lara, with openness and genuine connection. Yet, the real test of this newfound authenticity loomed on the horizon. The man who had once betrayed Heitor's trust was about to reappear, seeking forgiveness and perhaps more. But Heitor, fortified by daily rituals and a clear sense of his values, was no longer the man who could be swayed by manipulation or guilt. His boundaries, once blurred by pain and confusion, were now drawn with quiet confidence. As Heitor and Lara prepared to face this moment, the ritual of morning reflection became more than habit. It was a compass pointing toward freedom. It was a reminder that authenticity is not about perfection or immunity to suffering, but the refusal to betray oneself because of it. This daily discipline in choosing his values, rejecting borrowed guilt, and embracing his full humanity was the quiet revolution that would define his next steps. And so, as the sun climbed higher, casting light on the path ahead, Heitor stood on the brink of a new chapter. Would he hold fast to the truth he had begun to write each morning? Would he confront the returning shadow without faltering? The answers would unfold in the coming moments, where courage, clarity, and authenticity would collide. If you've ever wrestled with guilt, betrayal, or the heavy weight of others' expectations, stay with us. The journey to reclaiming your authentic self is not only possible, it begins with a single step, a daily ritual of courage and choice. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if this story stirs something deep within you. Your own path of freedom and self-trust is unfolding, one brave morning at a time. The moment Heitor had both dreaded and anticipated arrived with the quiet inevitability of a shadow stretching as the sun dips below the horizon. The man who had once worn the mask of friendship, now revealed as a puppeteer of betrayal, stood at his door, voice laced with false contrition, seeking forgiveness as if that could erase years of manipulation and the deep fissures it had carved into Heitor's life. But Heitor, now tempered by the steady flame of his daily ritual and the wisdom gleaned from Nietzsche and Lara, met this intrusion not with anger or despair, but with an unshakable calm. He held in his hands the emblem of the association they had once shared, a symbol that had meant belonging, trust, a shared identity. Yet to Heitor, it now felt heavy with the weight of past shadows, a relic of a self no longer his own. With deliberate ease, he extended the emblem back to its bearer, his voice steady and clear. "Take it back. It no longer fits my values." This simple act was nothing short of revolutionary. It was a boundary drawn not out of bitterness, but out of respect for himself, a declaration that the past, with all its wounds and betrayals, would no longer dictate the terms of his present. In that moment, Heitor reclaimed his narrative, no longer a victim caught in a web of manipulation, but an author writing his own story, free from the shackles of others' expectations and his own internalized guilt. The liberation Heitor experienced was not a grand epiphany, but a quiet, resolute choice repeated each day, the daily affirmation of, "What do I value today?" that forged a new identity. This was the essence of Nietzsche's call to become who you are, a continual, courageous shedding of borrowed rulers and the assumption of self-defined values. It was a rebellion not against the world, but against the internal tyrants of guilt, doubt, and overthinking that had long held him captive. Walking alongside Lara in the gentle embrace of a late-afternoon park, their laughter mingling with the rustling leaves, Heitor felt a freedom he had not known in years. Not a freedom from pain or imperfection, those would always be part of the human condition, but a freedom from self-betrayal. Authenticity, he realized, was not the absence of wounds, but the refusal to let those wounds compromise one's integrity. This realization carries profound weight for anyone who has wrestled with the ghosts of past mistakes, the corrosive grip of guilt, or the isolating silence of betrayal. It is a reminder that self-respect is not granted by others, but claimed through the deliberate choice to honor one's own values, even when the world insists on wearing masks of shame or blame. Heitor's journey is a testament to the power of simple, consistent acts of self-care and self-definition. It shows that even in the twilight years, when shadows of doubt loom largest, the light of authenticity can be kindled and nurtured. It is never too late to discard the rulers imposed by others and to forge a self that stands firm, flawed, vulnerable, yet unyielding in its truth. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long golden shadows, Heitor's voice echoes softly but firmly. Authenticity is not immunity to pain. It is the courage to never betray yourself because of it. In that, there is a profound freedom, one that invites all who hear it to step out of their own prisons of guilt and doubt and into a life defined not by the past, but by the values they choose to live by each day. If this journey speaks to you, if you have felt the weight of manipulation or the chains of internalized guilt, know that liberation is possible. It begins with a single step, a daily commitment to honor your own truth. Share your story, your struggles, and your victories in the comments below. Join this community of seekers reclaiming authenticity. And remember to subscribe and like if Heitor's path has touched your heart. Your own story of freedom is waiting to be written, one brave choice at a time.